Hello everyone and welcome back to a new video. This is Emma's Flair. Today we are going to talk about how to start dressing vintage. For as long as I can remember, I've always been extremely passionate about fashion. I think my favorite activity to do with my mom was going shopping. My mom was really into fashion. She always knew about the latest trends. We would, be browsing magazines together and finding out the color of the season or the cut of the season. She was always super interested in that, and so she would help us dress trendy, but also she's always been extremely creative. For as long as I can remember, I've always had people commenting on my fashion, on my style. People would always compliment me, and the question that I always get is, how do you dress like that? How do you find those pieces? Where do you find those pieces, right? And I think what I've always been doing because of my mom is that, first of all, when it comes to sourcing, I didn't start dressing vintage as a kid at all. When I got into college, I would say, like end of high school, when I started to make my own money. But before then, my mom, she loved taking us shopping. I have two sisters, so it was 4 girls together shopping. But what my mom did at the time was that she didn't take us shopping to your basic clothing stores. First of all, because it was probably too expensive to shop there, and we liked shopping, we liked creating outfits. So we would go to different stores, like things that were not big known brands, like smaller clothing stores that had lots of things from different places that were a bit more unique and had a lot more creative options, I would say. So we would shop from there. And also my mom, she would take us to markets to find some clothes. So I would always wear some things from the market and some things from basic clothing stores. And I would always also get something maybe from my mom or from my older sister. So my outfits were not like everybody else's. So that's kind of how I approached fashion for a very long time. And then I started shopping mostly secondhand. And I think for people who want to dress in a more interesting way, going vintage or going secondhand, because vintage, we kind of use vintage all the time to talk about nothing really. Like vintage is supposed to be 20 years old, right? It is now getting easier and easier to find pieces like that. I don't know, it depends, I think, where you're from. Where I'm from, we didn't have a lot of secondhand stores. Like it didn't really exist, or very small ones. I grew up in a small village in the south of France, so it was not super popular. Like we don't have those big like Savers or Goodwill as they do in America. We don't have those at all. What I started doing is shopping secondhand on a website which is called Vinted for Europeans, which is kind of the equivalent of a Depop for Americans. And I started shopping exclusively on Vinted to shop for secondhand things because, first of all, it was much cheaper, but also I had access to a bigger variety of brands. Whereas where I'm from, once again, we have the same clothing stores, these big fast fashion brands like Zara, Bershka, H&M, etc. And so what happens is that if you get dressed there, if you get your clothes from there, you're going to end up having the exact same style as most people because most people shop there. I think it depends on lots of things. I think if you want to start dressing vintage or in a more interesting way, you gotta stop shopping from these fast fashion places. You really do, because everyone can tell. And I'm not saying that all they do is bad. Like some collections, some pieces are great. I think it also depends on your lifestyle. I think I started shopping secondhand for the price first, but then as my own belief, because I realized the amount of clothing that is already existing on this planet. You have if you ever go online on Vinted, for example, it is an endless scrolling session, which can get out of hand. You kind of have to control yourself, which took me a while to get there, but it kind of overwhelmed me to know the amount of clothing and accessories that is already available. That doesn't need to be created, that doesn't need to be made anymore. Like we have tons, and that's just one platform. Tons of other platforms exist and actual stores filled filled with clothing, and we really do not need to be making more clothing. It's just horrifying, and if you really look into the clothing industry, it's terrible for many reasons, not just for sustainability, also for people being exploited. I mean, these industries are just horrifyingly terrible, and so that's why I completely shifted, and 99% of my wardrobe is secondhand. I think if you want your consumption of clothing to make an actual impact, a good impact, you should definitely start shopping secondhand. Or if the only reason you're watching this video is to start dressing in a more interesting way and to have a cooler, more unique style, you should also start shopping secondhand. So truly, you don't want to look like your basic Zara, H&M girl. You want to look a bit different, so you're going to start browsing the internet or going to secondhand stores that are around you if you're lucky enough to have some of those around, and you're going to start shopping. But before you do that, I think you can start looking into hand-me-downs. If you have a cool aunt or a cool older sister or a grandmother or whomever, someone who can maybe give away some of their clothing or accessories, not only is it going to add a lot of value to your wardrobe, but it's also going to add a sentimental value, because you're going to look at that piece and it's going to remind you of that person, so you're going to reach out for it a lot more. There's this specific skirt that my grandmother used to wear to go dance. She would go and do ballroom dances with, and there's a picture of her wearing that skirt, and so it's very typical, it's very fun, and I love wearing it because it reminds me of her, and I will probably never get rid of that skirt ever. So you've looked into your relative's closet, you've picked out a couple of pieces that are going to add something to your wardrobe. Now you want maybe some more. You want to be a bit more free when it comes to the choices you're making. So you're going to go to charity shops, or you're going to go browse on secondhand platforms like Depop or Vinted, and you're going to start looking. It's all about sourcing, right? You have to source the right pieces of clothing, and you're going to have to learn how to manage those platforms, or go to charity shops, and you're going to look into brands. You have to source vintage brands that you can trust, because you know they used to make, or they still make, good quality clothing. They have good compositions and they have great styles. There are multiple brands that I look for on Vinted specifically, or whenever I go to charity shops, I'm like, oh, this is that brand. I trust that brand. For example, the brand SP, if I want the very 2000s, 2010s look. The brand Drôle de Copine, if I ever want more of a 70s look. There's the brand Hippocampe, which is a really good brand, which has a very much late 60s mod style. The brand Trois Suisses as well, the brand Camailleux, Vintage Camailleux, which is a very popular French brand, and especially like older brands that have been around for a very long time, that maybe these like older brand stores have closed. Lots of them have closed in France, unfortunately, because people tend to prioritize, you know, cheaper things like H&M and blah blah blah. But the quality of this clothing is really good. It used to be on the higher end, you know, not so much fast fashion. So when you look into these brands, usually it's older people who own these clothings, and usually they take care of them, so they are in very good condition. And you're going to get that good quality, good condition piece of clothing for much cheaper than you would get a 100% polyester top from H&M, right? So get to know these brands, do some research on these brands that are reminiscent of a specific fashion era that you really enjoy. For example, I'm always looking for brands that are very reminiscent of the 70s, because I love the 70s. The trends are kind of coming back. In the 90s, they had a 70s revival, as well as in the 2010s, etc. So I'm always looking into that. I'm mainly talking about French brands, but there are also lots of different brands, like Spanish brands, for example, Custo Barcelona. It's a designer brand. I have thrifted this skirt for very cheap, and it's an actual designer brand. The quality is top notch, but the style can be very particular, so it depends on what you like, really. Look into that. Look into older designers if you want to splurge. Look into that, and I think you'll be surprised of the amount of pieces that you can actually find for a much cheaper price that you would find like the latest polyester jacket from Zara. My next tip, which is such an important tip, and it is to get your natural fabrics secondhand. Hear me out, okay? Once again, I'm going to repeat myself, but we have enough clothing on this planet. More than enough. And I am so against animal cruelty. I don't think we should still be making leather. So I understand vegan leather, I understand fake leather, I understand polyester being used to make fake leather or fake fur, or I fully understand that, and I am pro that completely. But you can tell, you can definitely tell. And the one thing that you can do which will elevate your style and which will make your outfits look 10 times better is to shop secondhand your natural fabrics. So your leather, your fur, sheepskin, suede, everything. It doesn't matter if it's a coat, if it's a jacket, if it's a bag, thrift it, and it's going to give such a vintage look to your style. Like for some time, I think a year ago, the motor jacket was very, very popular, and so every fast fashion brand had their own motor jacket, and they were hundreds of dollars. They cost so much, and they had such poor quality, and people were spending a huge amount of money on these jackets that are not going to last very long. And that's the thing with vintage leather, vintage suede. It's going to last you forever if you take care of it properly. And there are more than enough vintage leather on this planet. Like if you browse through your favorite vintage apps, you will find hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of items that just need a second home. So go for that, because it's going to change everything. It really is going to change everything. Same thing for shoes, thrift, secondhand leather shoes. They last forever, the styling is better, the sizing is better, everything is better, and you're not hurting the planet. Same thing with bags, because I think a vintage or secondhand bag is going to add so much to your outfit and make it so personalized and unique and original, rather than getting the last trendy bag. I think bags are so trendy. You can totally tell in which year that bag was popular. Like for some time, everyone had like a Michael Kors bag. Then you get outside in the real world and you see that you have the exact same bag as everyone around you. That is kind of my personal nightmare. Maybe I have like an originality complex, I probably do, but I really don't like that, and I think it makes your otherwise very cool outfit look so bland and lacking so much originality, and you're just gonna look like a sheep wearing the same thing as everybody else, which is what we want to avoid. We want to avoid looking like your basic Zara shopper and have the same jacket and the same pair of jeans and the same shoes, or the same Nike sneakers and the same bag. So for a while it was crossbody bags, then it was shoulder bags. Everyone was owning the same bag, so either the actual designer bag or a cheaper fast fashion version of it, and I think that's just the worst thing you can do. But yeah, I think anyone who has great style knows how to accessorize properly. And if you take Carrie Bradshaw, for example, she was the queen of accessorizing. So it doesn't really matter, but try to not own the trendiest bag of a certain time or the trendiest belt. At some point, like everyone was buying the exact same, big medallion belt, which is cool if you own it and if you've shopped it secondhand. But then every fast fashion was trying to make the same one, and it just got boring. And I think at some point when we grow up, we want to start actually expressing ourselves in our truest form, in the most authentic way possible. And I think you can do that through your style, through clothing. And I think it's super important to kind of curate your wardrobe and curate your style or aesthetic or whatever in a way that looks like you, that resembles you, and in a way that is unique to you. And to do that, I think there's beauty in shopping secondhand, because you're going to get one version of that and there's not going to be 20 others that people can shop from. It's the only item, so it's either you get it now or maybe it will disappear within the next few days or within the next few minutes when it comes to online platforms. So that can create issues when it comes to consuming clothing, but I think when it comes to your wardrobe, that's kind of how you curate your style. You get very original pieces that are one of a kind from a different time, from 10 years, 20 years, maybe 30 years ago, if you're lucky enough to come across stores that sell actual vintage clothing, which is something that is a bit more difficult to do in France, I would say. I think personally on Vinted, if you're from Europe, Italians and Spanish people, they have the best pieces of clothing. Like they have designer brands for nothing. They have the best leather. Like anytime I see the tag made in Italy, and that's kind of my next point. My next point is check the tags. Is it a paper tag? Is it vintage looking? Look for the brand. Is it vintage Burberry? Is it vintage Tommy Hilfiger? The tag will tell you that, will give you that information. And now we have this beautiful thing called the internet and Google reverse images, where you can search for things and know from when they're from, where was it made. I see some tags of brands that are unknown, completely unknown, but then I check the tag and it's like 70% wool and 30% cotton, and I'm like, oh, this is a dream. This is the dream blend that everyone is looking for in the winter. Like if you get to come across a sweater that has that blend, perfect. So prioritize natural fabrics, check the tags, always check the tags to know about the brand, to know from when that tag is, to know where it was made, and to know what it is made out of. That's what I started doing, and then I could not shop for anything elsewhere. Anytime I would go to a normal store, I would check the tag and see 100% polyester, 100% polyester. There will always be plastic, but I think, yeah, try to prioritize natural fibers like satin, silk, linen, cotton, wool. Try to prioritize these, or try to prioritize a blend of these with maybe a little bit of polyester or elastane, because elastane can be good if you want your clothes to be stretchier, and maybe if you want to wear them throughout different eras of your life, because we are women and we fluctuate when it comes to our weight a lot. So very much look into that, because I think it will change the way that you see clothing. That's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope it's going to help you dress in a way that feels a bit more you. My dog decided to join for the outro. I will see you next week for the next video. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe to my channel, please do so now. Click on the button, click on it. Thank you, and I will see you next week. Until then, have a good one. Mwah. Say bye.